In the previous section, we were able to quickly add new functionality to our TvTracker app thanks to making use of the Angular UI Bootstrap library. This section is focused on creating a completely new feature and making use of AngularJS form directives to provide validation with error feedback to the user. In this first video, we are going to start by providing the user with the ability to add diary entries to their track shows so they can keep track of their thoughts as they watch a TV show. We will finally build out the show section page, which we created right at the beginning of this video course, and we will add some additional information to the show component also. At the beginning of this video course, we created our skeleton application, which is where we also created the show section. We are going to use this page to display the individual diary entries for each of the track shows in the user's My Shows list. For us to be able to display information specific to a TV show, we need to ensure that the show controller gets the desired data to work with. If you remember, we set up a route for this page with a route parameter of the show ID. We can then use this ID to look up data for the specific TV show. We have two choices. We can either grab the show ID from the route params in the controller and then make the service calls there to get the data we need, or we can use something called a resolve within the routing definition. The downside to doing this in the controller is that the user will see missing data when the controller grabs the information it needs. This is a particular problem if you need to go off and do a HTTP request, which we do. If we use the resolve option, the user won't be sent to the page until the controller has all the data it needs. We can use resolve for this route by providing an object to the resolve property and then configuring the data we need. For this page, we're going to need to extract the selected show from our store factory, and we're also going to need to get the show's seasons using the show service. The data and seasons properties you can see here will be passed through to the show controller function by Angular, allowing us to access the returned data. We are injecting the required services, including the AngularJS core $root service, so we can access the route params within the URL. Because our route states show ID, we can access that via route current.params.id. Because the show ID parameter comes through as a string, we're going to need to make a slight tweak to the original store factory code. Within the getShow function, we're going to need to change the treble equals to a double equals so it will make the string to integer comparison. Within the show controller, we must ensure that the arguments to the controller function match the names of the properties we added to the resolved object so we can access the data within them. We can then assign these variables to properties on the VM object so they can be accessed within the view. Now we have access to the data, we can move forward with adding the controller code for the required functionality. We are going to need a new entry object that our new entry form can be bound to. We are also going to need the ability to get episodes based on the selected season number, which you will see in our form shortly. We will also create a function that will take the data added to the new entry object and add it to the current TV show. Finally, we will create a function which will provide the ability to delete a diary entry. With all our controller code in place, we can start to create our template to provide the form and display any available diary entries for the current show. We'll wrap the entire template in a container div and display a heading which will dynamically inject the title of the current TV show using the data object we declared earlier. Then, within the content section, we'll have a left and right division element displaying the form and the entry list respectively. Using the Bootstrap grid system classes, colMD6, we can have the two sections sit side by side and resize accordingly based on the available viewport space, without having to do any work or additional CSS. Our new entry form will consist of three inputs. The first field is a season number dropdown, which is populated using ngRepeat with data from the data object declared in our controller. This input will be bound to the season number property within the new entry object we created earlier. We'll also add the ngChange directive to this input so we can get the episodes for the selected season to populate the next input in the form. The next input is the episode dropdown, which is populated via the getEpisodes function call, which is triggered when the user selects a different season number. As we don't want the user to be able to select anything until this drop-down has been populated, we can use the ngDisable directive to disable the import when either the Getting Episodes variable is true, meaning that the controller is loading the episodes via the show service, the episodes array is empty, or the user hasn't selected a season number. The final input in the form is the actual entry text area, where the user can enter their diary entry. We also don't want to allow the user to enter data here until they have selected an episode. Once again, we can use the ngDisable directive to achieve this. The last part of the template is to add the list which displays the current diary entries. It is a simple unordered list populated using ngRepeat with data from the diary entries property of our track show object, stored within the data variable, which is where the entries are saved to. Of course, we want our new page to look good, so we need to make a style sheet and add the necessary CSS. And we must remember to add this to index.html as normal. The final element to completing this feature is modifying the show component to display a count of the diary entries and also provide a way of getting to our newly updated show page. In the same way we added the rating button, we will add another scope property, show diary, to show the component directive so we can selectively show or hide this functionality based on where the directive is used. Within the show directive template, we can then add some basic HTML to display the count and link to the show section. Like with the rating, we also need to enable the diary feature from within the My Shows template. We do this by setting the show diary attribute to true. Finally, as always, we'll add some CSS. The CSS will force the count and link to sit in the top right of the show component. With everything in place, we can now see the new feature in action. By navigating to the My Shows page, we can see the count added to the entries for each of the track shows. Obviously, 0 to start with. If we click on the icon, we are taken to the new page where we can add a new diary entry. Once entered, it is displayed on the right hand side. This newly added data, of course, is persisted to local storage as it is being added to the store object, which has a watch on it within the store factory that we created in a previous video. This video has covered adding another large feature to our TvTracker app and has introduced us to the resolve functionality, allowing us to wait for the required data to be available before we send the user to the page. We have also created our first form, which we will be extending upon throughout this section of the video course. The next video in this section will be AngularJS Form Basics.